Now we have the pleasure of sharing with you the presentation of Dr. Exequiel Ezcurra. He was trained as an agronomist, so as he says, nobody's perfect, right? So not everybody can be a cool biologist, but the good thing is that he did study with Eddie Rappaport, so he got somehow enthusiastic by the ideas of biogeography and the latitudinal gradients. I guess due to the complexities of complex systems, it was very unfortunate for him that he had to flee Argentina, but it was very fortunate for us that he landed in Mexico and he was able to then pursue his training as a Master of Sciences in North Wales, in Bangor, and a PhD there also in ecology and community ecology. So he was then appointed at the Instituto de Ecología AC, which is different from the Instituto de Ecología UNAM. So they're both institutes of ecology, and they have the same names, but they wanted to compete for Dr. Ezcurra. So Instituto de Ecología UNAM grabbed Dr. Ezcurra from Instituto de Ecología AC, and that is when I met her more clearly, and he was then a professor of, I would say maybe biogeography and community ecology, and I remember very clearly how he presented us with these very innovative ideas about the patterns of species distribution of cacti and how the Valley of Tehuacan was an amazing outlier with this huge diversity in this very interesting place. There, he was, as many of the professors, a teacher, and he was very enthusiastic teacher, among other things, of statistics. Oh, but that came later, so I'll come back to it in a second. Yeah. Okay, sorry, I got mixed up, but that's okay. So in the end, he was this teacher of statistics, but sorry, my timeline is wrong. So I wanted to say that he was doing all this research, and he did ecology and biogeography of inland deserts and wetlands and mathematical modeling and so on. But he was one of the first ecologists that stepped out of the ivory tower and was called by the nascent Instituto Nacional de Ecología también, a third one, right? A third Instituto de Ecología, but this was the governmental one. So he was called to serve in this governmental institute, but his heart was still somehow close to students, fortunately for us. And many of us had the privilege to learn statistics from his classes. And he came only on Saturdays because he was very busy at the government. And he would teach from, I don't know, like 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. And the room was full with at least 100 students. And the classes were amazingly hilarious, but also insightful. And the concepts are totally still clear in my mind. And he was so generous with his time that after finishing his class, there was a long line of 40 to 45 students waiting for Dr. Ezcurra to provide all this feedback on how to do the statistical analysis of his data. Anyway, from there, he tried to go back to academia, and he came to us in Morelia, to the Centro de Investigaciones, Ecosistemas y Sustentabilidad, the Center for Ecosystems Research in Morelia. But of course, he was had so much to share outside academia. So then he moved as director of the San Diego Natural History Museum, and he's currently the director of UC Mexes. And I think it's a great honor for us to have him here with us and to share his totally out-of-the-box and insightful way of sharing ideas with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Please do remember that after the plenary talk, we will have the town hall meeting, and you're all welcome to stay.
Aquí está, sí. Thank you very much, Patty. We can start with the slides anytime you want. When Miguel called me a few months ago and invited me here, and I have to apologize again, because he called me at a particularly difficult time administratively wise, and I wasn't taking his calls, and he suffered a lot. But thank you, Miguel, for being so patient. But here I am. I finally accepted, and I'm honored, as a matter of fact, to be here. And Miguel gave me some marching orders. He gave me a very specific charge, which was that he wanted to talk about applied things and about things I might have, sort of conflicts I might have participated in while in government or immersed in politics. He said that he wanted this meeting in particular to reflect about what scientists and in general, and conservation scientists and biologists can do to actually modify and improve public policies and governance in relation to natural resources. And quite frankly, I said, Miguel, but I haven't done much in the tropics. Most of my work has been in arid zones, in some cases in tropical arid zones, but it's very directed towards deserts. But then I thought, well, perhaps the history of mangroves, and on which I have been involved for quite a while. As a matter of fact, this year it's already 15 years of what we jokingly call the battle of the mangroves. And I think there is something to reflect there in terms of the role of scientists, the role that scientists can play in public policy and in decision making. But before starting with mangroves, let me start with this guy here, whom I really love and respect in an immense way. Many of you might identify him as Arturo Gómez Pompa, a photo taken in the 60s, as a matter of fact, or perhaps even in the late 50s, I don't know, when he was working for the National Commission of the Dioscorids, the Dioscoraceae, and collecting wild Dioscorids that at that time were incredibly important plants for the isolation and manufacturing of steroids. And Mexico had a national commission to work on that, and he was one of the founding members and one of the best collectors of that. While he was working recently Arturo published his memoirs called My Life in Tropical Forests, in which he tells a number of stories that are incredibly interesting. But perhaps the most important story is how, while working for the Dioscorids, or for the Commission of the Dioscorids, he realized that deforestation in the tropics was a really important problem, not only for Mexico but for the world. And it was in 1973 that he published this paper, The Tropical Rainforest, a Non-Renewable Resource in Science, together with Carlos Vázquez Llanes, who fortunately passed away at a very untimely age, a wonderful scientist and a dear, dear friend, and Sergio Guevara, who's still very active doing science. And in that paper, they drew the attention on the plight of tropical rainforests and the impact that deforestation was having worldwide. And it ends with a phrase that I really love. Let me get here. Yes. The paragraph before the last has this sentence that is really important. The sole fact that thousands of species will disappear before any aspect of their biology has been investigating is frightening. This would mean the loss of millions and millions of years of evolution, not only of plant and animal species, but also of the most complex biotic communities in the world. 1973, it was roughly at the same time that the first Earth Summit was taking place in Stockholm. It was really, really a visionary article that was drawing attention to this problem. In year 1974, Arturo, already in 1973, let me go back, I'll show you that later as a surprise, he was also incurring in a personal conflict with the president of Mexico, with President Echeverria, because there was a project in Mexico to clear cut the whole of the tropical rainforest of the Uxpanapa region between southern Veracruz and Oaxaca, near the isthmus of Tehuantepec, and to convert that into agricultural plots and potreros, grazing lands. This was being promoted by the Director General of the Federal Commission for Electricity, because they wanted to get people out of certain zones, because they wanted those zones to build dams, and so they wanted to relocate a large number of people in the Uxpanapa rainforest, and also by the Secretary of Agriculture, who really believed that rainforests were a hindrance to the development of the nation. And Arturo was at that time one of the few that not only opposed this, but opposed it really in a very, very strong voice at a time in which, I mean, what was it, 73, 5 years before, it had been the whole event of Tlatelolco, where in the order of 100 students, young students, were killed because they dared challenged the President of the Republic, and more than 2,000 students were put in jail. So these were not easy times at all to contradict the President of Mexico. And Arturo was there, and he actually did contradict the President of Mexico and gained so much attention with his paper in science, with the research he was doing, with his scientific opinions, that it forced the Minister of Agriculture and the Director General of the Commission of Electricity to put this paid insertion in the Excelsior newspaper, the leading newspaper in Mexico at that time, sort of officially begging the president to clear cut the rainforest as they thought that was needed in Mexico for progress. But it was the first time that one scientist alone forced two ministers and the president to actually face the nation and in some way take public responsibility for what they were doing. There are many other things in Arturo's book, and of course, unfortunately, this was a lost battle, as a matter of fact. It all ended in which the president called Arturo to his office in front of all his cabinet, all the ministers were there, and they told Arturo, you know what, we are going to clear cut the Uxpanapa. And it was a lost battle. But in his biography, Arturo says something that is really important. He says that battle was lost, but that was the birth of political ecology in Mexico. The first time that scientists realized that they had to open their mouth when things like that were happening, and they had to learn to argue and to put forward ideas in defense of the natural environment. So now I'm going to go, I hope I haven't taken too much to what Miguel commissioned me, but I thought it was really important. And as a matter of fact, I would like also publicly to pay homage to Arturo Gómez Pompa. We wanted to invite him to this meeting, but he doesn't want to travel anymore. But really what Mexico owes to Arturo Gómez Pompa is really humongous. Now, the story I want to tell starts around 2001, 2002, some 15 years ago, in which the Secretary of the Environment made what is known in Spanish as a norma oficial, a governmental regulation, a governmental standard that prohibited the clear cutting of mangroves based on some arguments that some of us had brought forward, that mangroves were giving great environmental services or ecosystem services to coastal lagoons, and that mangroves were under threat. The hotel developers, especially the ones in this region, as a matter of fact, in Cancun and Tulum and that area, appealed the decision of regulating mangrove clear cutting, because for them, mangrove clear cutting is a great business. You get, by definition, mangroves are federal lands because they're floodable. And in Mexico, any land that is floodable by the ocean belongs to the nation, doesn't have private ownership. And if you get a concession from the federal government in order to, quote unquote, mitigate or restore the area of mangroves, or remediate, as they call it, then you get land for free that you can turn into a golf course or into a hotel. So they appealed legally against the possibility of regulating the clear cutting of mangroves. And this happened in year 2003. They won the legal appeal, and mangroves were left without any legal protection. So the story goes to a few years later, during one December in 2005, in which every Congress, every legislator in the Mexican Congress was celebrating. This was the 20th of December 2005. They were celebrating the advent of Christmas, and everybody was drinking, and everybody was having fun, and they had to vote the Mexican wildlife law that nobody saw as something really critical. And one senator with whom we, and by we I mean a large number of conservation-minded people have been talking to, at the time they were voting, he added a third paragraph to Article 60 of the Mexican wildlife law, known as Article 60-3, that said mangroves are to be protected. And everybody was drinking, and everybody was celebrating, and they all voted. And they said, yeah, let's protect mangroves. And they voted, and the protection of mangroves became a law. And since then, we have had a serious discussion about that, because the law, people have been trying to topple the law for quite a while. But let me show you why is this important. Some images of millions I have. This is Hotel NH in Cancun, 2 hours from here. The photo was taken around 1998, around that. I have the dates in my files, but I don't have it here. And this is the same hotel from the same floor, the same photo, taken 10 years later. I hope you see the difference. The beach is completely gone. And the interesting thing is that this had been predicted by scientists. It had been predicted 40 or 30 years later. They said if you build large buildings in what is essentially a sandbar, and if you cut the mangroves and the vegetation that fixes the sandbar, the trade winds, the easterlies that come here sometimes with high intensity, will blow away the sand and might even imperil the whole sandbar. And that is exactly what happened at that time. So much so that the federal government, in order to maintain the business in Cancun, they decided to bring a huge dredging machine that was getting sand from the sea bottom near, and putting sand to refill the beach. Look at the size, look at the size of the hotels there. Imagine when a hurricane comes in, all the eddies of wind that happen here and all the funny things that happen with the sand and why it's totally gone. When they realized that they had killed all the reef in front of Cancun, which was the main attraction, you dive in Cancun and everything is dead, then decided to get the sand from somewhere else, and the governmental contractors went to Isla Mujeres. They brought a dredge boat from Japan, a gigantic dredge boat that started dredging in Isla Mujeres. And the fishermen, you see them here, were protesting against the boat and wanted the boat to go away because it was killing their own coral reef now after killing all the coral reef in Cancun. All that is basically the result of poor planning and what we call wild urbanism or savage urbanism in what was basically a mangrove sandbar. This is another story of why 15 years ago we were all really concerned about the future of mangroves. The city of Cancun, you see it here, had a large corridor of mangroves, a beautiful dwarf mangrove that you also see in the Everglades. It's Rhizophora, dwarf, very often with orchids on top of it, with Schomburgkia tibicinis, the beautiful orchid, and the ferns, the golden fern that grows with it, a beautiful ecosystem. And the Mexican National System for Tourism, Fonatur, gave away 600 hectares of these mangroves to different developers from Spain and Canada with a condition that they destroy the mangroves and that they turn it into hotels and golf courses. And it was given for free because basically they said, we cannot charge any money for what is essentially a useless piece of land. So I couldn't get in Google Earth a photo of the mangrove of the area before it was converted into mangrove. At this time it was already being developed. Look at the plume of sediments and dirt that is coming out from the development. But I did get how it looked some years ago and how it looks. This is like 6-7 years ago. You can see the canal going through the whatever remained of the reef barrier. You can see all the dredging inside the mangrove, with the dredging, the filling up for the construction of hotels, and of course all the mangrove is gone. And of course there is a concern among scientists with our tropical coastal ecosystems. We were all saying, well, what if this keeps on going and going like that? What will happen to all the coastal lagoons? As a matter of fact, there's a concern right now. What will happen next time that a hurricane comes with full force, like Gilberto came 20 years ago into Cancun, and instead of having 3-4 miles of mangrove separating the city from the sea, now you have a continuous layer of urbanization and canals getting all the way to the edge of the city. It is a matter of concern. It's a matter of serious concern. And we can go on and on like that. Loreto Bay in Baja California had the same thing. Huge destruction of mangroves. All this was mangrove. You can see the golf course now. Even you can see how the urbanization moved in only 3-4 years, how the golf course invaded what was this mangrove. Is one of my favorites in terms of description. There's a beautiful description of this mangrove and this estuary in John Steinbeck's Log of the Sea of Cortez, where it describes it as the most beautiful bay in the world. I can assure you that it's not anymore the most beautiful bay in the world. And the same has happened in Loreto, in El Mogote, Baja California, in front of La Paz. All the mangroves, this area was constructed. You can see here, as the construction made progress and the golf course made progress, again, the cutting of the mangroves and the disappearance of the mangroves. This is one area that used to be mangrove, where now is, of course, the pier and all the facilities for the development. This area, this photo is quite impressive. This is an area that used to be a large expanse of mangrove near La Paz, and one developer came one day and just came in with a bulldozer without even a permit, and he bulldozed the whole mangroves. He filled it up and made a housing development, and then when somebody realized what he had done, he said, okay, I'll pay the fee. And of course the fine you pay for that is a fraction of the cost of what the land would have cost if you would have bought it somewhere else. Oil wells in Tabasco, in the lagoon, in the Mecoacan lagoon, where you see a lot of mangrove death here and in some parts here because of purges of the oil wells and oil getting into the mangroves. Or shrimp farms, again occupying mangrove area and coastal lagoons for shrimp farms that normally last in the order of 5 to 6 years, and then they are abandoned in a sort of itinerant coastal type of farming. This is a photo I find amazing. This is the Hardy River in the Colorado Delta. These are not mangroves. This area doesn't have mangroves. It has wetland vegetation, including cottonwoods and willows. And after the Hoover Dam was built, this is how it looks now. Simply, there is no river. It's gone. There is no river, no riparian vegetation, anything. And of course, a depressing thing, many of these systems seem to have a two-state type of equilibrium. Once they are transformed into a new state, they don't come back as easily, even if you do remediation measures or mitigation or restoration measures. This is a big mangrove forest in Nayarit, in Marismas Nacionales, that died because the Ministry of Fisheries decided to build a channel in the middle of that supposedly to improve the salinity conditions of the lagoon. They miscalculated, and the mangrove died. And of course, since then, there have been all sorts of measures to restore the area, but the mangrove just simply doesn't come back. It takes a long time to come back. Well, we know from C14 in those trees that the trees are normally in the order of 200, 300 years, and not really that short-lived, and they won't come back in any short time. So, this is where we had the big discussion. The people that want to topple any regulation about mangroves, their argument is mangroves don't have any important value. They're worthless. They're just mosquito breeding grounds. While if you turn it into a hotel, into a golf course, into a development, into a marina, that will bring jobs and money to Mexico. And of course, for anybody that is a scientist or a conservation biologist, it sounds intuitively obvious that mangroves and coastal lagoons, healthy coastal lagoons, play a very important role. But I challenge you, without any hard data in your hand, go and try to convince the Secretary of the Environment or the Secretary of Tourism, or, as I have had to go through, the President of the Republic. It's not that easy. They want numbers. They want things in terms of pesos, of dollars and cents. They want another type of evaluation that we don't normally do, and that I personally find abhorrent, as a matter of fact. I hate putting the value of ecosystems in dollars. There's something almost spiritual, if I can say it, almost sacred to me, and I hate putting the value of natural systems and the value of biodiversity in terms of dollars and cents. But I collaborate with younger people who are much more down to earth and practical, and they said, okay, let us try and do something about it. And of course, young people now, I'm really amazed at students in Mexico and in the United States, how multidisciplinary they are, how they don't have any type of qualm of going and talking with an economist, with a social scientist, with people I wouldn't talk really a lot when I was a student, and getting new ideas and working together and using all sorts of things. So I had this friend at Scripps. At that time he was a student, now he's a researcher at Scripps Institution this is the famous Article 60 ter, the one that was approved by the drunken senators, and the one that everybody wants to topple. So the big thing is, what can we produce for them not to topple Article 60 ter? And we know intuitively that in terms of fisheries, so my collaborator Octavio is a fisheries guy. He knows about fishes, and he knew that really a lot of things are going on here under the roots of the red mangrove in the fringe. And he's also a photographer. I'm going to show you some of his photographs. Normally the fringe is also very near seagrass prairies with a very high productivity. And of course there are a lot of fishes. I don't know, perhaps most of you are rainforest guys, and I don't know if you know this, but there's a sharp crossing in the trend between, say, the coast of Canada and the coast of Mexico. Evolutionary speaking, in Canada you have a lot of freshwater fish, like salmon, that go out to the ocean to feed and come back into the fresh water to reproduce. So the freshwater organisms that go out to the sea to get abundance, because the upwelling there is so strong. In the tropics, the other way, things operate the other way. Coastal lagoons are way more productive than the open sea. So there's a pile of fish that actually spawn and reproduce, and the adults live in the open sea. They're commercial fisheries, but at some time in their lifetime, they go into the coastal lagoons where they find refuge, where they find a lot of food, and where they can develop from juveniles into adults. And I'll show you the list of those in a second. But this is what happens under the roots of the red mangrove all over the tropics. You have all sorts of fish like groupers, like snook, like mullet, you name them, that spend a significant part of their life cycle in mangroves and then go out to the ocean. They're also ocean fisheries where they eventually form large aggregations in the ocean, and where they are caught by the fishermen and form part of the fishing market, of the fishing process. A lot of the fish that our fishermen, our artisanal fishermen harvest, like blue crab or jaiba, sea catfish, grunts, mullets, mojarras, snappers, snooks, milkfish or sabalos, they all spend a significant part of their life cycle in mangroves. So my students came and said, we have, and I don't want to know how they got it, because it's very difficult to get information from government in Mexico, but they twisted someone's arms and they got all the information from the harvesting stations where the artisanal fishers go with their pangas to sell their fish. How much fish was coming to each of these black points here along the coast. They have numbers for each of these black points. And then the other thing they had was they twisted the arm in somebody in Ducks Unlimited. Ducks Unlimited has a wonderful evaluation. Now Conavio has an even better one, but at that time it was Ducks Unlimited, of the area of mangrove forests in Mexico. And for reasons that we'll see later why it's so important for them. So basically what we did was a correlation between the area of mangrove forest and the harvest of the landings of fish in tons. And you see, it forms a of fish that spend part of their cycle in mangrove forests. And it forms a very nice correlation. It has it has a really nice correlation. And as a matter of fact, for every area of fringe mangrove, there is approximately $40,000 for every hectare, of fringe mangroves. The fishermen out there are harvesting $40,000 of fish in the ocean. And the correlation is very good. We tried it in many ways. And as a matter of fact, we have also the smoking gun because Octavio and all these guys are good swimmers and good divers. And they have documented all these fish in the mangrove roots. So what we know now is that fish spend time in the mangrove roots. They go out and are caught outside. And the more mangrove you have, the more fisheries you have. To the tune of, then we can convert the amount of fish here into the cost of a fish X vessel. How much is the fisherman getting paid when he arrives to land and sells the fish? We're not adding any other thing that is also important, like the aggregated value on the market, how much added value has the fish as it gets into the economic system. Just the value for the fisherman. It's $40,000 per hectare of mangrove. Now, if the interest of the natural capital, the annual interest is $40,000, you can discount into the future, like all economists do, and you can find the value of the natural capital in terms of dollars. Every time I say this, my stomach sort of twists because I hate doing it, but it was amazingly powerful. We did it, and it so happens that each hectare of mangrove in fishery services provides $40,000, which gives a discounted value of a hectare of mangrove of $700,000, a little bit short of $1 million per hectare in fishery service alone. And of course, we published that. We published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and that's also, we're working with young people, is amazing. They know all the journalists, they're their friends, and they started sending things to newspapers and putting things in social networks. I don't know about social networks. Only Trump and young people know about social networks. And we started putting that in Facebook and in all sorts of blogs and things like that. And suddenly, the Minister of Fisheries and the Minister of the Environment were like calling us. And we actually, with only this paper, we were able to topple any attempt to bring down Article 60 TER. They said there's no way that has gained so much notoriety in public media that we're going to topple this because we're going to look bad, politically bad, and they didn't want to do it. Okay, and then we sort of started trying different things. You know, once you understand you're a hammer, then everything starts looking like a nail. So we started looking at different services. One of the things we did was, mangroves are really, if you work in mangroves, they're full of fauna. They're one of the last refuges. For example, the last really dense refuge of jaguar in the Mexican Pacific is Marismas Nacionales. You go there and you see footprints of jaguars. I haven't ever seen one. They're very elusive. But I've seen footprints all over the place. You're even concerned about how many there are. And of course, it has all sorts of marine organisms, all sorts of things. And we started thinking and said, well, why did Ducks Unlimited, why were they so interested in mangroves? And of course, this is the reason. Ducks, waterfowl, they come to Mexico every winter. And Ducks Unlimited, whose objective is the preservation of waterfowl, they know that the Mexican lagoons and the Mexican mangroves are really important. They don't have a proof, they don't have a smoking gun, but they know they are important. So we did something similar. We got the area of all the lagoons along the Pacific. We calculated the area of the lagoon, the area of mangroves, and then the Fish and Wildlife Service flies, let me go back to the lagoons where I explained this, flies all these lagoons every year, paid by North American Wetland Conservation Agreement, NAUCA, and they fly this in small airplanes and they count waterfowl, they count ducks and geese. So we had good counts of ducks and geese. And we did a very simple correlation. The coastal lagoon area, of course, is correlated with the number of waterfowl. You would expect that. The larger the area of the coastal lagoon, the more waterfowl you have. But the number of wintering waterfowl also correlates on how much is hunted in the U.S. In the years that we have a lot of waterfowl in Mexico, they hunt a lot in the U.S. In the years in which there is not a lot of waterfowl in Mexico, hunt in the U.S. is lower. And of course, the waterfowl harvest, the number of birds that are hunted, have a correlation with the number of permits, of stamp sales by the Fish and Wildlife Service, because you need a permit in order to hunt. And of course, the number of stamp sales have a correlation in revenue for the US government. And again, we're not taking into account the sale of guns and all the other things. But basically, what we found, and we put that into a path analysis or structural equation modeling system in order to avoid the trap of assuming that correlation is necessarily causation. This is a long explanation of how to do it, but anyway, it's a technique that was developed almost a century ago by Sewell Rudd, but it's quite difficult to do, but to interpret, but it's quite powerful. And of course, what we have here is basically what I was verbalizing a little while ago. The larger the lagoon, the more waterfowl. The healthier the mangrove fringe, the more waterfowl. The more waterfowl, the more is hunted. The more is hunted, the more stamps are sold, and the more stamps are sold, the higher the revenue for the US government. Each square kilometer of mangrove in Mexico, if it is in good health, will generate $2,000 for the US government in stamp sales. It's quite amazing, as a matter of fact, when you think about it. And the correlation is really strong. And of course, we published that with the expectation that perhaps Ducks Unlimited or the US government would send money to preserve the lagoons. It hasn't happened, and I don't think it will happen now. But anyway, it's good knowing that this pattern exists, as a matter of fact. If the Mexican lagoons go down the drain, hunting of waterfowl in the United States would disappear. It's as simple as all that. So these ecosystems are not just nice and beautiful, but they are also, as a matter of fact, providing ecosystem services at long distance, like 4,000 miles away in the water bodies, in the fresh water bodies of the central United States near the Canadian border and in Canada. Okay. We have done many other things. I only have 14 minutes. I think I'm running out of time. But for example, we have shown that mangroves play a really important role in sea level rise, or at least in regulating the impact of sea level rise by comparing old aerial photographs with modern satellite images. We have been able to figure out a number of important things. I'll go very quickly. This is an analysis we did. It was quite interesting. The area of mangrove inland is increasing. This is the red area. The area of mangrove in Mexico, the green is what was mangrove in 1960 and is still mangrove now. And the blue is areas that were mangrove in 1960 and are not mangrove anymore. And you can see as a general rule, what is being lost is the fringe, and what is being gained inland. And when we found that from satellite images, we started looking what might be driving that. And as a matter of fact, without any doubt now, what is driving that is sea level rise. This is an average of all the tidal stations all the way from Scripps in San Diego to Mazatlan. They're all averaged. And of course, the mean tidal level is increasing at almost 3 millimeters a year, at 2.4, I think it is, which is totally in agreement with the predictions of the IPCC. But this is really interesting because, to my knowledge, not a lot of people have measured that. There are years in which the sea is abnormally high on top of the background trend for increase. And those are years 1998, 1982, El Nino years, when the ocean was very warm and the water expands even more. During these years, for example, in 1998, the Pacific Ocean, the coastal lagoons were 35 centimeters. This is this high. It's over a foot higher than the baseline level of 1950. This amount of water increase in tidal level might not seem much, but it really does have a huge impact, especially in very plain and flat areas with coastal lagoons. And I'll go very quickly. Sea level rise is visible, as a matter of fact, in many of the flatter parts of Mexico. You can see here a road that was going to Bahía Almejas in Baja California. During the great floods of 1982, it became flooded. And then, although the sea went down, you can see the old road here. I couldn't get photos old enough to show more than that. You can see the old road, and you can see the detour they had to do because the area became flooded, right? Well, it never deflooded entirely. It just, once the sea gets in, it just stays there because there's a trend for increasing sea levels. And of course, that is reflected in the health of mangroves. This is the fringe, where you can see the roots of Avicennia being exposed. The Rhizophora has been completely gone already. It's receding. You can see again here receding mangrove with peat here in huge amounts being exposed. And in the back, where there used to be 40, 50 years ago a halophytic scrub, now you can see, let me show you the next one, you can see here the mangrove, right? All full of mangrove seedlings germinating where 50 years ago there was no mangrove seedlings. We have piles of photographs that we have got in order to check this with historic photographs over and over again, and it's a very, very clear pattern. Mangroves are moving inland, but by moving inland very gradually, they're also retaining land and in some way presenting the first front of defense against the increasing sea levels and against the increasing vulnerability of the coast against extreme climatic events. I have 10 minutes. I had another one on blue carbon. I'll skip this one. This is quite fascinating, but it's just too long. It's the formation of peat on mangroves. And basically, I'll give you the conclusion of this. I always do that, sorry. I'm over optimistic in the amount of things I can get together in 45 minutes. But basically what we found here by coring into mangroves, let me just get back to one photo that I wanted to show you. This one. Look at this. This is in La Paz, Baja California. What you see here is peat, is undecomposed roots. And there are 2 meters of undecomposed roots under those mangroves. They have been growing, you know, the sea level has been rising until the Industrial Revolution, around 1 millimeter a year, at least for the last 3,000 years. And indeed, as a matter of fact, the age of this peat, first of all, the peat is perfectly recognizable under the microscope. You can tell what species it is, and we have a key to identify species by the shape of the cells. These two are modern live mangrove roots, and this is peat of around 2,000 years. And you can see that it belongs to this species, the elongated cells, which is Avicennia germinans. So basically what we have here, look at this photo. This is the most beautiful mangrove in the world, La Encrucijada in Chiapas, 40 meters high. An amazing ecosystem, really amazing. Piles of organic matter under the roots. The point I want to make here is that we have found, even in the desert mangroves of Baja California, around 1,500 tons of organic carbon, not organic matter, only carbon, under the soil there, which is like 10 to 100 times higher to the average tropical rainforest according to where it is. Huge amount of carbon stored under the roots with immense value, because that carbon you can date with C14, those remains, and get a fair idea of sea level rise and of how was the dynamics of the ocean in that place. And of course, if you multiply 1,500 or even 2,000 tons by the average price of carbon in the carbon market today, which is $50 the ton, as far as I remember, I don't know if it's changed, $40 to $50, it will give you almost a value of $100,000 per hectare of mangrove just in stored carbon. Or to put it the other way, that's carbon that will be released if you dry that mangrove and expose it to oxygen and allow that organic matter to be decomposed because you dredge it to make a golf course or a hotel or something. So basically the point is that another service we found is how these ecosystems are actively burying organic matter under the ground and keeping really huge amounts of organic matter stored under the ground. Let me just show you this photo. The little mangroves of Baja California and the Sonoran Desert. Around the Sonoran Desert, the mangrove forests occupy less than 1 in 10,000 of the area of the Sonoran Desert. Minute area. According to the calculations we have done and published, at least they were peer-reviewed, I hope they were not wrong, it's around 15 to 20%, say around 18% of all the stored carbon in the Sonoran Desert is under mangroves. It's a huge value. It's really an immense value with immense importance. I think I will 6 minutes. No, let me just end with this idea. So okay, what do we have up to now? We have been able to prove that mangroves are fundamental for fisheries, the mangroves are fundamental for wildlife, that mangroves store huge amounts of carbon, and that mangroves are really the battlefront in our fight against, and coastal lagoons in general, against ascending sea levels. Another thing that is interesting, because mangroves have been able to grow on their own roots when they are in an abrupt coast, we believe that even a sea level rise of 3 millimeters a year will be perfectly well tolerated by, at least by the black mangrove. They can produce enough peat under the roots to elevate themselves. They have done it in the past. There are records now of peat in Abyssinia for the last 15,000 years, a time in which sea level was ascending centimeters and not millimeters a year, and they did it quite all right. So that is good news. Now let me finish with this reflection, which is the last thing we're doing on mangroves. This is still unpublished. You can see here, this is Marismas Nacionales in Nayarit. If you fly over it, you will see these lines that are quite amazing. They're known as beach ridges. Beach ridges are to the continent what growth rings are to redwoods or to pine trees, right? They just reflect events of coastal accretion, not necessarily yearly events, but events of coastal accretion. Every time there is a hurricane or a very strong rainfall in the continent, all the water that comes out full of sediments ends up in the ocean, and it creates one of these ridges, one more. And as a matter of fact, it has been dated quite well. You can see here these water bodies. These are coastal lagoons, used to be coastal lagoons, and now they are like in the order of 10 miles, a little bit less, like 8 miles away from the ocean, because accretion has been so strong. But this has been well studied by geologists. These during the Hypsithermal around 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, this was the coastal lagoon, and now it's grown because of the beach ridges. So what is important about this? Well, before I go to that, what is important here is that many parts of our coasts and our coastal lagoons depend on the arrival of sediments. They really live from the periodic arrival of sediments that builds up sandbars, that builds up ridges, and that in general keeps the beaches alive. So the question is, what happens when we dam our rivers? What happens when we trap the sediments up water in a dam, in a hydroelectric or an agricultural dam? And we were interested in that because in Mexico, as in all the tropics, we're full of dam projects. And we're saying, okay, what will happen with the mangroves if we start damming all these rivers? And we found this in Sinaloa and Nayarit. There are 4 rivers, Fuerte, Acaponeta, San Pedro, and Santiago. 2 of them are dammed, and 2 of them are free. And we did a comparison at first with satellite images, and if the area is in red here, it means that when subtracting this image from here, coast was lost. And you see the dam rivers are losing coast, while the undammed rivers are winning coast, are accreting, and these ones are receding, right? So, okay, if a river is dammed, it will accrete or recede. Using this fantastic tool that has democratized the use of images so much, that is Google Earth, we did the same with Google Earth, and although the time span is much shorter, you can see, for example, here, look here, this whole area of mangroves that is quite big, it's like 1,000 hectares, in only from 2004 to 2015, in 11 years, it was gone. And here also, in the Santiago River, between 2010 and 2013, in 2.4 years, huge area was gone. So basically what we found is that when you dam the rivers, the coast starts receding, as you have here in Santiago and Fuerte. When you don't dam the rivers, the coast is normally accreting, or at least in equilibrium. And all sorts of things happen when that happens, because the mangroves start dying, the coastal lagoon starts dying, and for example, this is plant diversity in the sandbar. These are the 2 undammed rivers that have very high plant diversity in the order, I can't see the numbers, but 30 and 50 different plant species we collected, and these are the dam rivers. The sand dune, the sandbar is almost gone, and there are only a few weedy species surviving. We tried also with the fisheries. This is the number of boats seen in Google Earth, or the number of boats registered as bringing fish to the market. You can see fishers are no fools. They're fishing in the undammed rivers, and they're not fishing in the dam rivers at all. You don't see any fishing boat in the dam rivers anymore. They're basically dead rivers. Why? Well, this is basically an illustration of what is happening. When sediment ceases to arrive to the coast starts eroding. In a healthy coast, you find the typical textbook thing: dunes, fixed dunes, tropical deciduous forests, and mangroves. In a dam river, the coast is receding, and what you have very often is the mangroves exposed to the coastal erosion. So it goes from a very healthy sand dune to this. This is in the mouth of the Santiago River. You can see years of tropical forests that used to get 2-3 miles into the ocean now are dead and just accumulating in the ocean because of the dams up water near even Mexico City, or at least near Guadalajara. All those dams are creating. This is in the Fuerte River, and that cryptic character is my daughter, and you can see also the recession of the mangrove forest. Here you don't see it now, but we could see trees, stumps, coming out 100, 200 meters in the middle of the ocean because of a coastal recession. So basically, I will stop here. I will stop with some conclusions. It's my time, but basically, perhaps the most important lesson from here is that ecosystem services are really important, but that convincing governmental officers to take ecosystem services seriously is very difficult and very complicated. We have been making a strong effort for 15 years of documenting this, and also making an effort to put this in the media, to work with journalists, to work with newspapers, with television channels, with all sorts of things, because somebody said that decision makers are like dogs. They only understand when you hit them with a newspaper, and then they understand. And it has been a difficult road, but thanks perhaps to the effort of a number of scientists, I won't even claim first merit here, a number of scientists who have taken this fight very much to their heart. The article in Mexican legislation protecting mangroves and coastal lagoons, developers have not been able to remove them. And that's basically the end of the story. I'm just in time. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. That was very inspiring. And you presented a really interesting example there of how an economic valuation of the mangroves led to a policy decision or a policy action to not change a law. And at the same time, you were personally uncomfortable with the whole act of the economic valuation. And in conservation, there's a significant number of people who are reacting against this valuation of ecosystem services, that by assigning financial value to ecosystems, you're bringing them into the world capital system and undermining their moral value. So after these experiences, where do you stand in that feeling of whether we should assign financial value to nature?
Yeah, when we started doing economic valuations, now I'm really good friends with a number of economists, and we worked together, and I started to understand the language and the tools. Not that it makes me any happier than it did before, but we were asking ourselves, what happens if we do all the numbers, we find out that making a golf course is better in financial terms, right? What would happen there? Because we're even, I don't know, it's a horrible confession, but at one point I said, well, if we find that it's better, we probably won't publish it. We'll just keep quiet. Should we publish if the result is adverse to what we morally think it's right? It's a very difficult question. Fortunately, we never had to go through that question, because it so happened that, very much to our surprise, the value of the natural capital of mangroves is huge. And the more we study them, the more elements we find that show that it's huge. I haven't even gone into Costanza's work. Robert Costanza did a work with some people from INECOL, wonderful work, in which they measure the impact of hurricanes in areas with mangroves and without mangroves, and how the gross domestic product, the regional GDP, is affected by mangroves. And they found, again, a huge number. The impact of unforested coasts when a hurricane comes in is huge. So now we're pretty confident that really what is happening when a hotel developer says, if I get a permit, this will start producing money, it actually will start producing money for him. But for the nation, it will produce less money. So it's a way of appropriation of the natural capital that will give revenue to one person, but there will be a net loss for the nation. But having said that, there's the deeper question. What if we find out that actually, once we decide that the economic language is going to be the language we're going to use, the lingua franca, the general papiamento we're going to use to understand each other, to understand different areas of science, what if what we find out with this common language is that perhaps clear-cutting this forest and doing something else is better? What should we do? And quite frankly, I don't know what we should do. That's why I find it dangerous and somewhat horrible, really. But up to now, we have been lucky with that.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Ezcurra. Very interesting. I was very pleased to hear your presentation. I have one comment and one question. The comment is when you talk about poor planning and miscalculations, and I wonder if it's not a very good planning and very good calculations, but in order to have high profits. That's one question. The other, which is also a question, is you talk in your conclusions about that science is not enough to have political pressure with the government. And you talk about the media, and I wonder where is social movements, environmentalists, where are communities defending their territories? That's my question. Thank you very much.
Yes, sorry, the first one was?
Are there miscalculations? Is there a poor planning by the government, or is it a very good planning, but with in order to have good profits?
Yes. Now that we have the numbers, and I've been talking them with really serious ecologists and economists, and not like left-wing economists that might have an ideological sympathy with the way I see things, but really serious economists. And I've talked with many of them. Really what seems to be happening is the revenue that mangroves produce on fisheries is huge, but it goes to artisanal fisheries that have only a small boat and have no power of opinion in Mexican Congress or in local government or anything, and the revenues are distributed in a diffuse form. And probably the same will happen, for example, in forests, in the management of forests in Mexico. Very often, forests are managed by local communities, and probably in an aggregate fashion, they're making more money it has a higher value from them than if a big forestry company would come in and log off all the precious wood. It's the same thing, right? But the big developers have a huge force on government, and governors, as a matter of fact, authorities love it. They say, oh, we're going to give 10,000 jobs, and we're going to put a big hotel. But nobody says what is going to happen with the current fishermen. Fishermen don't reinvent themselves as hotel waiters. They hate being hotel waiters. They love being fishermen, and things like that. So really, what happens is that there is a change of hands of who gets the revenue from the natural resource. And unfortunately, it tends to go to people that have more power in opinion making in central government. But all in all, the nation, what we have been able to prove is that the nation as a whole loses, and loses quite a bit, not a little bit. And the second question?
You talk about that science is not enough to have political pressure on the government, and you talk about the media as the solution to have political pressure. And my question is, what happens with social movements?
Get students and get young minds around you. They know how to do it. I don't know how to do it, but look what happened in Tajamar. Tajamar is a project here in Cancun. Many of you may have heard of it. After we'd been doing all this thing about mangroves, I didn't show it. For example, we did a website. I didn't. It's a collective we. I'm talking like Queen Victoria, sorry. My students created a page that's called, if you want to see it, it's beautiful, called The Natural Numbers. And it's all these numbers of how much does this cost. And as a matter of fact, the mangrove video in that page got the Jackson Hole /NSF Science Film Award in the category of micro movie. So they gave the award to, oh my God, the British documentaries. Yeah, Attenborough got the award in the full movie, and we got the award in the micro movie, which was it was really funny. But this is because I work with young people that know how to do that. I don't know how to make videos. I know how to do serious statistics, and they don't. That's the only thing I feel better. But I know how to script in R, and they don't. But other than that, they can do amazing things and also connect with society. So what happened here in Mexico, for those that you don't know, 2 years ago, after all the battle for mangroves, and it was decided that the legislation would stay, Fonatur, the National Office for Tourism, produced an old 12-year-old environmental impact statement authorization and started cutting mangrove in Cancun to build a mall, a commercial center. And the society just erupted completely. And quite frankly, we had nothing, scientists had nothing to do, but the society, the social movement has been primed by this battle now. And now people, you know, cutting mangroves now has become so horribly emblematic as cutting rainforest. In 15, 20 years, we have gone in that direction. That's why I started with Arturo Gomez Pompa. You know, sometimes you plant and you seed things and ideas, and then once they take off on their own. And now there's a very, very strong social movement throughout the Caribbean, at least the Mexican Caribbean and the Pacific, in the defense of mangroves.
Okay, we unfortunately don't have time for more questions, but we would like to thank Exequiel for his great